yet very disturbing portion, the portion of the golden calf. There are, the general description is, the people saw, this is chapter 32, beginning of chapter 32, the people saw that Moshe Rabbeinu was delayed in coming down. Moses promised that he's going to come back down after 40 days. He was delayed in coming down the mountain. People gathered on Aaron and they said to him, "Arise, make for us a God that shall go before us, because Moses, this man Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him." And so Aaron turns to them and he tries to procrastinate, delay the matter, and he says to them, "Take off your rings. Go get the rings from the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." Hoping that this will delay the matter, and between then and now, Moses would come back down. But the Torah says that they didn't go to their wives. In fact, Rashi points out that the wives did not want to give their rings to this. All the people gave. In other words, those same people that first came to Aaron and said, "Make for us a God," because Moses, man Moses, we don't know what happened to him. These people gave the gold that was there on their rings, on their ears, and then Aaron. They made this golden calf, and they said, "Here is your God Israel, which has brought you out of Egypt, which has brought you up from Egypt." Moses comes back down the next morning. He sees this entire sight, and there you have the shattering of the tablets. There are many questions that come to mind when we address this. How is it possible that 40 days a divine revelation? This is not a revelation that they heard about grandparents or grandparents, and they heard about don't have any engraven images. This is something that wasn't just passed down from generation to generation. They saw with their own eyes, they heard with their own ears. They experienced a divine revelation. They didn't just hear from the mountain, "Don't make golden images." They had a divine revelation that they experienced. They saw the miracles that took place in Egypt. They saw the splitting of the sea. This is not, they didn't just see the movie. They saw with their own eyes. How could they go so long? And to then say, make a calf, make this engraven image, and to then make the most ludicrous statement, the declaration, to say, "This is your God who has taken you up from Egypt"? That doesn't make any sense. That is just ludicrous. You can say that they get into a frenzy, and they went back into Egyptian mode. They were there for 200 years, and they had slave mentality, so they went back into Egyptian mode, and that was what they were used to. You can theorize that. But then to say, "This is the God that took us out of Egypt"? What kind of ludicrous statement is this? That's just sheer nonsense, sheer lunacy. What does this mean?
That is crazy as the Pharaoh wanting to chase. The Pharaoh saw all the miracles that had been done against his people, and he's chasing them after the sea. That's just as crazy, and I don't understand that either.
What is this over here? So that's crazy. So that is, you can describe, you can address this issue about Pharaoh, that this is what happens when a person is so
Wrapped up in himself.
sorry?
So wrapped up in himself, he's the only one that exists.
Yes, he's wrapped up in himself, and this is what happens. He's addicted to his own power. He
Okay.
doesn't see a higher reality. Doesn't see beyond himself.
But this is even crazier.
Yeah, but here you have it. You have people that say this is a God that took us out of Eden. We just made it. You just made this God. You just made this idol. What kind of lunacy is that? So a hint to this is, one way of looking at this is, let's go back to verse number 1 of chapter 32. Moses is delayed from coming down the mountain. And the people gather upon Aaron, and they say to him, rise, make for us a deity, make for us a Elohim, make for us a God or something that will go before us. Because Moses, the man, Moses, who brought us up from Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. So a Jew answers a question with a question. What do you mean Moses? This man Moses who brought us up from Egypt, we don't know what happened to him. Moses brought you from Egypt? God brought you from Egypt. Because you just turned around and said, moments later they're going to go to, they're going to turn to this deity. They emphasize that this deity is what took us up from Egypt. Moments earlier they said, Moses took us out from Egypt. But it wasn't Moses who took you up from Egypt, it was God who took you from Egypt. Number one. The key is, one of the keys to understanding this is the difference between taking us out from Egypt and bringing us up from Egypt. When we make Kiddush Friday night, we say Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim. We have to remember, this is a remembrance. Going out of Egypt. Yetzias Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt. Who took us out of Egypt? God took us out of Egypt. But now there's another phrase. Not just going out of Egypt, but bringing us up from Egypt. What is the difference? Syntax. Taking us out of Egypt, God took us out of the shackles of the Egyptians. God, with all his miracles and wonders, took us out of Egypt. Bringing us up from Egypt, what does that mean? Now we have the task of getting the Egypt out of us. We have to raise ourselves up from Egypt. We also can't just do it ourselves. We need a leader. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, as we refer to as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our Rebbe, Moses our teacher, Moses our guide, is our mentor. He brought us up from Egypt. He is guiding us. Yes, we disagree with him many times. Yes, we're rebellious, but that's a Jewish thing. He's still our Rebbe. He's still our teacher. He's still our mentor. He's still our rabbi. He's still the... So arguing with your rabbi is a Jewish thing you should know. Traditional thing. But he's still our rabbi. The role of Moshe Rabbeinu is to inspire us, to guide us. Ultimately, that is what brings us up from Egypt, allows us and empowers us to bring us ourselves up from Egypt. Our own Egypt, the Egypt inside of us. And now let's go back to verse number 1. Moses delayed coming down the mountain. They said, make for us a God that shall go before us, because the man Moses, this man Moses,
We don't know what happened to him.
brought us up from Egypt. We don't know what happened to him. What is this man Moses? I know he's a man. Why do you refer to this man Moses?
Yeah.
You know, we got a problem. They figured because the 40 years went by, there was a mistake in calculation. The calculation was they were supposed to be counting from next day, the following day, day number 1, because it's 40 full days that begins with a night. Moses went up during the day, so that day didn't count.
Uh-huh.
Full days beginning with night and day. So day number 1 wasn't counted. They thought, though, that was a full day. And so Moses not coming down. And as Rashi points out, the conditions were that it was very, very stormy, and the imagery that they saw in the sky made it seem as if something catastrophic has taken place, that Moses went up to heaven. That's it. He's not coming back down. He went up to heaven. So Moses, the people turned to Aaron and said to him, they didn't turn to him and say, Aaron, you take over. Why not? Why couldn't they just say, Aaron, take over. Moses is not coming down. Lead us. Why couldn't they say that to him?
He wasn't yet the Kohen Gadol, is that
He
correct?
wasn't Kohen Gadol. So find someone else. Korach was there. He was around. He could have jumped at the situation. He could have jumped at the opportunity. So, why couldn't they find someone else? This is the point. Why make ourselves vulnerable now to a leader that will not be as true and transparent and humble as Moses was? God can communicate through anyone or anything. If God can communicate through a person, if God is going to be communicating, God communicated to Moses, and that was a conduit. If God can communicate to Moses, he can communicate through anything. He can communicate through gold. In fact, later in the same story, they were to create an ark wherein the 10 Commandments were there, where on top of them were 2 cherubs. And God said, I will communicate to you from there. So if God can communicate through anything, why make ourselves vulnerable, open ourselves up to appointing a new leader where we would then, who knows if this leader would truly represent God, would truly be someone who is selfless, humble, transparent as Moses was. Let's create a medium where God can communicate through, and this will be with us for generations. Not that we're worshiping God. This is not to replace God. This is to replace Moses. This is the key. They said, let's create something, Elohim. Elohim could be something representing God, but it's not to replace God. This could be just to replace Moses. That's why when they made this imagery, they then danced around and they said, this is what took us up from Egypt. Who brought us up from Egypt? It wasn't just Moses the person. It was Moses, representative of God, that inspired us and brought us up elevated us from Egypt. Now that they created this imagery, they then declared, this is the imagery, this is the representation through which God will communicate to us and bring us up from Egypt. So where were they mistaken? This makes somewhat sense. It's more logical than just simply turning to an idol and saying, this is God, this is what took us, this is what emancipated us from Egypt. All the miracles, that's ludicrous. This makes more sense.
Could you say they were honoring or praying to the material and not the spiritual at that point when they made it out of God?
They were, even if they were at the material, but they looked at it as this would represent the medium through which God will communicate to us. This is a higher way of looking at the golden calf. Of course, you can look at the golden calf as a very basic or debased level that the Jews fell to, that they just worshipped gold. On a more refined level, this has more logical sense to it, and you can see where they can make an error, where it has an error. The other one, how could they turn to that unless it was such craziness and such a mob mentality that fell back now to worshiping gold? That's ludicrous. So what was their error? And if this is the case, why is it considered idolatry? They didn't worship, it didn't replace God, it replaced Moses. And this teaches us a much deeper level of what idolatry is. Idolatry is not necessarily only when we worship things and say, this is God. When a person worships money and sees on it, in God we trust. This is the God we trust. There is more to it. The only one who can determine to whom God will communicate is God. God chose Moses. I want to communicate through Moses. You see, everyone saw at Sinai, God communicating to Moses, which made a declaration to everyone that Moses is therefore trustworthy because I am communicating with him. And everyone had that revelation. Everyone saw that. Therefore, when Moses gives you the direction, since you saw that I communicated to him, you see, therefore, this becomes a basis that I trust him. If Moses then therefore comes and says, here, listen, Jewish people, God will now communicate through this. If that's what Moses says, not because he said it, because I trust him for saying that, I'm communicating to him. But I am saying, God said, in the future, whenever I will communicate with you, it will be through prophets. And there's a whole system of how do we know a true prophet and a false prophet, but it's through the system of prophecy. You don't just trust a person because they do fancy tricks. There's a system of prophecy. The fact that you come up now and you decided that I'm going to communicate through gold, that's idolatrous. The definition of idolatry is determining what is going to create a connection between me and you. Putting on tefillin is a mitzvah. How do we know it's a mitzvah? It says in the Torah, God said, put on tefillin. If we're now going to, and it says put on tefillin on your hand, on your arm, which on your hand, and put on your head. If we're now going to put on tefillin on our legs, that's an abrogation of the relationship. Who said to put on your legs? I never told you to do that. Judaism is a relationship. Relationship, what brings two people close, is when you do something for the other, especially what the other requests. If the other requests, don't get me chocolates, get me flowers, but you think chocolates is what really is going to what make you closer. That is not going to make you closer. I said no, I don't want chocolates. I said I want flowers.
Actually, they want both.
How about if they get him a vacuum cleaner? That's your favorite.
Yes.
You always recommend a vacuum cleaner, or how about a wrench to change the tires?
Exactly. Why not that?
That's fantastic.
God said, I will communicate.
Shalom bias, everyone. Shalom bias.
Thank you. Thank you, Ira. And that is exactly what the shalom bias between us and God is. God said, I want to communicate through Moses. I want to communicate through the system of prophecy. Coming up with our own system of how we are now going to come close to God, that is idolatrous. So the Torah and mitzvahs is what connects us to God. Creating our own medium of what creates, of what's going to bring us and connect us to God, that's akin to idolatry. That is what we learn from this parsha.
Okay.
Now, God knew that there was a revolution or a revolt down, and God sent Moses down back at that point.
He's supposed to come back anyway.
Well, but
That's where he sends them down. And that's what even God says. The people who you brought up, look what happened. That's what now that's also ridiculous. Now God says to Moses, look what happened to the people who you brought up. What do you mean you brought up? You took them out. God took them out of Egypt.
That's when she says to the husband, your son, your kid is doing something wrong.
Yeah, look what happened. Look what your kid is doing. The same words. The people who you brought up, meaning the role of Moses is to bring up the people from the land of Egypt. Bring the people up from the status of Egypt. That's the role of Moshe Rabbeinu.
Okay.